We are live, and we've got some UFOs and mysticism on the way. We're going to let Larry bring us in. Here's Larry.
All Things Unexplained. Hosted by Dr. Mounts.
Let's face it, we were always ready to roll without him anyway.
CJ Derringer.
Ain't nobody perfect, right?
And Smitty Neves.
I've never planned out hardly anything my whole life. I just freeball.
Featuring Cajun Man.
I'm just old nobody, somebody looking for somebody.
Hello, everybody. This is CJ Derringer, shouting out to all of you unexplained ones out there, wherever you might be in the universe today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm here with my co-host and friend, Dr. Mounts. We are missing Smitty Neves this time around, but he'll be back shortly. And we have the lovely Cheryl Costa gracing our presence to dig into some ufology today. And my goodness, is there a whole lot? Those that are listening and not watching cannot see how large this book is, but I am holding a sizable book in my hands.
Hey, I've got one
all
too.
UFO sightings just from New York. It's unbelievable. I can't even believe it. So I'm super excited to sink our teeth into this a little bit more and talk to Cheryl. So Cheryl, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much.
So one thing that really struck me reading this book, I truly can't believe that these are all just sightings in New York. I mean, there are countless stories in
Well,
here.
all those stories in there were not always necessarily New York. Most of them were, and maybe about the last year or so of the 7-year run of the column, I did write some other locations. But
You
they're
did have
mostly
some
New York,
earlier
yeah.
ones too. That's true. Yes, you had some very early stories from way back when as well. So that is true. But wow, it's extensive. It's a really, really great read. I found it so interesting and had lots of takeaways. But before we dive into that, tell us what inspired you to start this column that you wrote for, was the Syracuse New Times, correct?
Yeah. It was funny. First thing, I was exposed to a UFO sighting when I was 12 and had another one when I was 18, not actually 19, when I was in Vietnam. I saw a rather substantial sighting. So I followed it most of my adult life, not fanatically. If I saw a book in the bookstore or something like that, I might buy it, a magazine article, whatever. I read anything that came across my desk, so to speak. I retired. I had a total of almost 10 years in the military, 2 years in the Air Force, combat service in Vietnam, and then another 7 or 8 years in the Navy, in Cold War Navy, doing that Tom Clancy stuff in nuclear submarines, that kind of thing. And then the bottom line was, when I got out of the Navy, I went to work for essentially Lockheed Martin and retired from there for 32 years in 2011.
wow.
Okay. Did analysis work for them. I did a number of things for them that first 5 years of my career, I produced industrial films because I had gone to film school. And they said, could you make us cheap movies? So I said, yeah. So we did that. And mostly training films, public relations films, that kind of thing. And then I went into IT in the company. And the IT stuff, the reason I got into IT was I was working for a field service unit that was related to submarines, and they wanted people who could talk submarine. Okay. And when my phone rang, it was a commander or an admiral someplace saying, our submarine's broke, da 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 da. Can you put somebody on a plane with parts and equipment and that type of thing, which is what I did for a number of years. And then I went to work for the IT people, and I became their antivirus and their intrusion guru. Basically, as they say, I know where all the bodies are buried on our intranet. So that was the deal. So I retired. They retired In 2011, they started retiring a whole bunch of people who could probably easily retire. They were paying us way too much, and it was, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So they started down the hall and started taking out the 40-year project managers, the 35-year people. I was in the 32 years there, so the 30-year people, we all got retired on Friday, kind of thing. I went to work. I wasn't ready to retire. A lot of friends of mine were ready to retire. They were going to play golf. They were going to go fishing. They were going to go explore the Himalayas. They were going to do all this stuff, go to divinity school, this type of thing. I hadn't made any plans for that. I thought I was going to work another 10 years.
Yeah.
So I went out and got a job at a local newspaper since I had an electronics technical background, and I went to work for a newspaper, big newspaper in town, but not as a writer. I was in the technical department, and I was responsible for a certain degree of the electronics there. And my department, since we had to sit around, something isn't broke every night, so we sat around. We made the plates for the newspaper every night. Okay. And it's like, imagine a cookie sheet without any rims on it. And it was like laser printed onto a thing like a cookie
Mhm.
sheet. Okay. So we did that. And one night, right, just after a 700-ton Swiss press got rolling, all we had to do was wait for 2 hours for that run to get done. We could all go home. Okay. And I was I was online, and there was this CNN.com article, a little sidebar story, 150 words is all it was. And it said UFOs have been UFOs have been declining since the 1980s. Maybe they were always just an urban legend.
Oh.
And in my heart,
Mm.
I said, wait a minute, that sounds like misinformation. That can't be right. And so I went out for the first time in my life. I went out to the National UFO Reporting Center's webpage, and I dug down a couple layers into the page, and I found some end of year total numbers, right? And I went back to the 1980s, and I sat there and I started dropping them into a spreadsheet, and then I did a graph, and the thing went up like a rocket. And I said, what memo didn't the UFOs get? you know,
Exactly.
and I said, whoa, they haven't been declining. They've been going up like a rocket. So the next couple of nights after the press got rolling, I started reading some of the accounts. And I've been baptized in this stuff like everybody else. The only people who report UFOs are kooks, nuts, and crackpots, But I'm reading essays by people. I didn't believe in this stuff until my wife and I were laying on the hood of my car and we saw this, and
Mhm.
going,
Right.
wow. So I was back in college, going to school in the daytime and working nights at the newspaper. And my degree was going to be in entertainment writing and finishing a 40-year-old bachelor's degree, so to speak. And so I really only needed about 30 credit hours to finish. Okay. So I started writing. I wrote up a bunch of stories as if they could go into a column, 500 to 1,000 words worth of stories. And I started pitching editors for newspapers in upstate New York. They chased me out of the office, laughed me out of the office, had security escort me to the door. It was embarrassing. Okay. And then a guy who was the chief editor in chief at a weekly, Syracuse New Times, invited me over, and he had heard grapevine, there's this silly lady running around trying to sell us UFOs, right? And we came over, we talked, and he basically had read, we're about the same age. We'd read all the same stuff as teenagers, the same authors from back in the late 60s, early 70s. And basically he said, I can't write this, but you can. I'll try you out for a month.
Oh, okay.
Five articles later, and of course he had this tone like he had this tone like the guy in Princess Bride, the Dread Pirate Robbers, almost likely kill you in the morning kind of thing, And he said, "I'll try you out for a month." About a month later, he calls me up. He says, "Come on over. We have to talk." I thought, well, that's it. Well, I got a chance to do this. What the heck, I come in late to the meeting, and it's a team meeting, and I walk in, and all the columnists are sitting around this big board table. And I walk in, he stops talking. He's been talking to him. He stops talking, points at me and says, "There's our rock star." I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "You've been here 4 weeks and you're pulling more page views than all the columnists combined."
Wow.
Nice.
And all these editors said, that threw me out, said, "Who the hell would want to read an article about UFOs? It's silly nonsense." And at that point, that started 200. That book you've got are 238 articles that I wrote over 7 years. And people think, oh, writing a column must be fun. Think of it this way: it's a 500 to 1,000 word term paper every Thursday.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And in
And
high
that's a lot
school, I
of
was
work to find these stories too, to
it
get to
was
these
the
stories. You have to,
research.
yeah.
Yes, exactly. It was a lot of research. And deep into a couple of years into it, because New York State was my beat, I was adding up numbers in New York State cities and counties, things like that, And finally, around 2015, we had done something. We were showing it to retired, like MUFON investigators here in New York, and they're saying to us, "Wow, we didn't know there was a cluster there. We didn't know there was a cluster there. Nobody had ever they were all case studies they had done, but nobody had ever put the numbers together before, ever." So Linda was we were sitting in our pub staring across a couple of pints one night, and she said, "What if we did the whole country?" And
Oh
she's the
my gosh.
scientist of the two of us. She's got the science degrees. Me, I've got the arts and entertainment degree. I've got the top hat and the cane, you know. So I'm the one that goes out and does all the conferences because I can stand up in front of an audience of 12,000 people and it doesn't bother me. She's a little on the more shy side. I've been getting her to do podcasts lately, but that's about it. But she held a very tight scientific line on how we would do the research and how to present the material, what kinds of graphs to put in, things like this. No cute aliens on the cover, that kind of thing. And that was the flavor. And well, the other thing to keep in mind is she used to work for the National Academy of Science, and she was the head librarian at the Environmental Protection Agency's Toxicology Library for 15 years. So she knew how to make something. The first book we printed was the white one, was 2001 to 2015. UFO desk reference. And she made the thing look like a government report, kind of subversive that way, She went,
But smart, very
So
smart.
that was the idea behind it. Now, the pink book that Dr. Mounts held up, the reason that's pink is in 2019, we got called from some of the usual suspects in DC for the UFO community down there. And they said, oh, gee whiz, if Senator Rubio's bill gets attached to something that will pass, we didn't know about COVID yet. Okay. And gets passed, we might get congressional hearings in 2020 or 2021. So he says, and then he says, well, you ladies have written the only books of statistics on UFOs ever. Are you prepared to testify before Congress if necessary? And I said, Linda and I were we were government contractors, and you spend your whole career in government contracting trying not to be called in front of Congress.
Yes.
So we decided if we were going to be called in front of Congress and they're going to be up there flipping through some book, we wanted people to know it was our book. So we decided to make the cover bright fuchsia. You could flag in an aircraft with it, and it was made by a couple of women. It's dedicated to a woman. So we figured, what the hell? Let's do this, So that's
that's
how we got to where
great.
we are now. The newspaper went out of
Oh,
business in
wonderful.
June of 2019. I have tried to find another UFO writing job, and I'm back again. I get laughed out of the office, even though we've got 3 of the best books ever published on the topic of the actual data.
So that's interesting. That actually brings me to something that I wanted to discuss with you in terms of the stigma that comes with UFO sightings, right? Somebody says, I've seen a UFO, and most people don't believe them or what have you. Do you feel like that stigma is going away in recent months and years with government agencies starting to say, okay, we do have some UFO activity or UAP activity or whatever they're calling it these days? Do you feel like the stigma has gone away and people are more willing to share their stories, or do you feel like it's the same? If people didn't believe before, they don't believe now.
Uh, being that in 2020 it was all over the evening news with all the footage of leaked footage that Jeremy Corbell managed to get put
Mhm.
up on national television. And my
Yes.
hat's off to Jeremy, believe me.
Yes.
And so with that, I say, yes, a lot more people have woken up to it. But in the spring of 2020, spring, early summer, just before we put the pink book out, I was going over to get certain things copied at the local Staples near me, and the manager knew what I was working on. He'd say, "Hey, Cheryl, how you doing? Oh, wow, you guys are almost done with that book. Did you take all the kooks, nuts, and crackpots out?" So there was this perception that yeah, they may exist, but everybody who reports them are kook, nuts, and crackpots. And
Mm.
but then again, I get that. I even get that on some of these podcasts. And they immediately come after my jugular vein and start asking me, "Well, what are your best case studies?" I don't have case studies. I'm a statistician.
Right.
Okay.
That's one
Yes.
thing you said in your book too was, we can discuss the what without discussing the how or the why, which I think I may have misquoted you there. But I thought
No,
that that
but
was
that's
really
pretty close.
interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly what I felt.
Okay. I found that really interesting. Like we can have discussions about what people have seen without knowing why these things are happening, right? In fact, it
Yeah.
almost makes it more interesting to have those discussions and to speculate in terms, what people are seeing, what it might be, where it could have come from. And I was floored with your book because one of the people that we have interviewed on our show is a good friend of mine who, when we started this, she called me and said, "Do you really talk about UFOs on your show?" I said, "Yeah, we do." She said, "I saw a UFO." And she saw
Yep.
it in Queens, New York back in
Yep.
2002. And I could not believe, I mean, her story is compelling. So, reading through your book, I was sending her pictures of pages that you had written because it just all was so similar to
You know,
what
you
she
know,
had
it was,
seen.
it was funny. Just before I started writing the column, when I thought about writing it, before I started going out and pitching editors, I went into one of my favorite diners, and instead of sitting in a booth, I sat at the bar. And the lady waiting on me knew me because I was a regular. And she says, "What are you up to this week, Cheryl?" And I said, "Well, I might be writing a newspaper column for one of the local papers." "Oh, about what?" "UFOs." And it got real quiet at the bar. And then she started serving me and everything. And one by one, people started creeping up to me. So, well, I had a sighting, or my brother-in-law had a sighting, or my wife had a sighting, my
Mhm.
grandmother had a sighting. And I must have had a line over a period of an hour while I'm sitting there eating my breakfast. 20 people come up to me and tell me they had a sighting. And let me give you a flavor. The data in the pink book reflects 167,632 UFO sighting reports. Okay.
Wow.
Whoa.
Okay. And that's about 83. Well, if we were averaging out the 20 years, it'd be about 8,300 a year. And that's between both MUFON and New Forks data. We combined them. Okay. And the goofy thing about it is that in 2017, a metric came out in one of the polls that was done by Fox Pictures. They ask all the typical questions. Do you believe? Are you on the fence? Do you think it's all hogwash? And it was always 35, 36%, 42% on the fence, 17% say it's baloney. Okay. That's typically what those polls were saying, going back to 2012 with National Geographic. But they ask one additional question. They ask a question: have you seen a UFO? And they said 16.74% of people had said they saw a UFO. But that didn't jive with 167 or 8,300 a year. Okay. And it's not exactly 8,300 because the cycle goes up and down type of thing, like it goes up about 6, 7 year cycle and then goes back down again. So I didn't trust the metric at the time in 2017. And in September 2019, Gallup poll did a similar poll, and they came up with the same numbers. Of course, they spun it different. Oh, yeah, 60% of people don't believe in UFOs. Taking that 30% who do believe. And it's all a matter how you spin the results. But they had that one
Mhm.
of that 16 point, some decimal point number of percentage said that they had seen it. So now I had two measured metrics saying about 16%. Well, going back against adult Americans at the population at that time, it worked out that somewhere on the order of somewhere 43 to 45 million people say they'd seen the UFOs. And that definitely didn't jive with 167,000. So
Right.
we crunched the numbers a couple of different ways. And then we finally got a bell curve. We hadn't end up having to go to every single state, look at every single state's adult population and their sightings. So we got a bell curve. Okay. And at one end of the bell curve, it was like 1 in 150 people report, goes up and does the hump. Okay. And then the other end of the bell curve was 1 in 450 persons, that type of thing. But the top of the bell curve, I'm going to try and get into the picture here. The top of the bell curve was in the range of uh, 200 to 250 across the top of that bell. So we basically publish 1 in 250 people reports what they see. Actually, what the number we publish is 1 in 254 people report what they see.
Wow.
Yeah, and it certainly seems like there's a lot of sightings. I mean, again, we know so many people now who have seen them.
Well, when you take that number back, you take any sighting number and you times it by 254. Suddenly, the numbers in even a very small state go through the roof.
All
You
right.
know,
Mhm.
and I had trouble reconciling that, but you'd see a sighting, it'd be reported. Say it got reported in the paper, which is rare anymore. Since '68,
Right.
it has been rare to get something reported in the paper. That's probably why my column took off so well. And what would happen is people would start writing us. Well, yeah, I heard about that one last week. I had one 2 years ago. And what you saw was, and Project Blue Book noted this, there was a rash of reporting after a published story about a sighting. Okay. But was it copycat reporting? No, it was people who felt dutiful and said, well, maybe I should report what I saw
Right.
last month, a year ago, whatever. Okay. And that's kind of
Or
what it was.
justified.
Or justified, right? And then I told people back with the first book, I said, remember back after 9/11, 2001, people told us to report what we see. And Jeepers Creepers, people have been doing it in spades, And
Yes.
here's the one thing I got to tell your audience. People seem to think that the 40s, 50s, 60s were the golden age of UFOs. Okay, when our white book came out, the first book in 2017, it was 2001 to 2015 numbers. Okay, people said, well, why didn't you go back 40 years? Okay, so when we worked on the pink book, we didn't include these numbers, but we wrote a small paper about going back 40 years, going back to 1960. We managed to get just the magnitudes. We didn't get the stories. We just got the magnitudes from MUFON and from NUFORC from 1960 to 2000. Okay. And we got in there and the numbers only amounted to 40 years worth of numbers. And if you looked at the graph, it looked like a little snake going across the lawn, in 7-year cycles, up, down, that type of thing. And what it amounted to was 40 years, 13,150 sightings reported. Okay. I've got that many in just 2012 and 2013 each year by themselves. So
Yes.
people say those other ages were the golden years of UFOs. Baby, we are in the platinum age.
And that's why I appreciated your pink book. We're talking to Cheryl Costa, author or co-author of books such as the UFO Sightings Death Reference and the UFO Beat. That's what I appreciate, Cheryl, about the UFO Sightings Death Reference. I minored in mathematics. I taught math for a long time in my career. And you opened this book up, and it took me by surprise. I said, did I accidentally grab one of my statistics books from college? But I appreciated that. And you got into things about how, for example, we see statistics like per capita numbers and how, they can be twisted and misleading depending, their open interpretation, how you mix them with the headlines and how you broke down things like UFO lore and bias and applied statistical analysis to this. And I think this is so important. For example, this notion that the 37th parallel this is in your book, is known as the UFO superhighway. But when you break it down by statistical analysis, right. So what has been, I don't know, the biggest takeaway for you applying scientific methods and statistical analysis to this data?
My biggest takeaway, I found truth in it. Okay. Because lots of things, people, I still get mail from somebody that says, "Oh, hey, North Dakota's a hot spot," and North Dakota ranks in the bottom 5 of states for UFO sightings.
Right.
South Dakota's the bottom. And and then you see the per capita things and headlining the newspapers. When the Pink Book when the Pink Book came out, people were saying to me, "Well, wait a minute, isn't Maine supposed to, not Maine, Vermont? It was Vermont, or I think it was Vermont. Isn't Vermont ground zero for UFOs?" And I said, per capita it might be, but from a pure count standpoint, it's not even close. Well,
Right.
we want to go do a sighting party there. I said, you're going to a state that might average 5 sightings a month. I said,
Right.
would you like to go to a state that has that state's yearly totals in a month? And people say, well, where's the hot spots? And I have to ask them now, are you saying by quantity of UFOs, for specific shapes, for a specific season? These things the shapes have seasons. Who knew that before we did statistical analysis? So I settled the thing the other day. So about a week ago, I had a bunch of people say, "Oh, you got to tell us where the hot spot is." I said, "Yeah, it's zip code 85001, Phoenix, Arizona, hands down." That's it. End the game.
I should have paid more attention when I lived there.
Yeah, CJ used to live out there.
But then I got all the-
Go ahead. That actually brings me to another part of your book, which I thought I loved all of the stories and found them very fascinating. But I thought the most poignant article that you wrote, the most poignant column that you wrote, was called "Can You See the Alien Spacecraft in Your Front Yard?" And you talked about how people simply don't always see what's truly happening. Like, we see with our eyes, and then our brain interprets what we saw, and it
Thank you.
rationalizes what we saw. And you brought up, of course, that very famous psychology study where people are passing a basketball, and the participants are asked to watch how the basketball's passed. And while they're watching that, they miss the person in the gorilla suit walk through the hole. And I remember doing that in college and missing the gorilla suit, right? So how many things are we just not seeing, or our brains are convincing us are something else? I felt like that was such an important thing to note in your column.
How many times have we left our car keys on the coffee table, and we're going to tearing the house apart, can't find our keys, and they're sitting there on the coffee table?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's too many. For me especially.
We've all done it,
Or glasses on our head.
From a statistical standpoint, I've got to be honest about something. I flunked math all through school. What we did not know in high school in the 60s that I was dyslexic. Didn't find that out till I got in the Air Force, and then they put me through some special training to help me deal with it and compensate. Okay. But when the White Book came out in 2017, and the New York Times did a huge story about us, okay, Science Magazine of all things, I don't know if either of you've seen that.
No, I have not seen that.
I have not.
Okay. Google NYT UFO Costa.
Okay.
You will get a April 24th, 25th article in Science Magazine from the New York Times. Okay. And that article ran, and I got calls from some people I went to high school with, hadn't seen in 40 years. And they said, Cheryl, you flunked math all through high school. We've got 6 dead math teachers rolling over like a rotisserie in their graves because you just published a book about statistics. But the deal was, okay, here's the deal. There's a thing called maturation. Okay. People mature to things at different rates. And one day in my mid-20s, it's like somebody threw a switch. I started being able to see patterns in numbers. I would sit in a corner for hours playing with a 4-banger calculator, just looking at the ratios of numbers and things. It just flowered in front of me. Okay, so I went to a used bookstore, picked up high school algebra books and advanced algebra books and that type of thing, and trig books, and I literally re-educated myself in mathematics in my mid to late 20s.
It's never too late.
Wonderful. Yeah.
And the other thing I found out when it's pretty obvious. I'm a trans person. I went through gender change 32 years ago, and when they were running me through all the tests that they run you through. Back in the day, they're a little bit more lax about it these days, but back in the 80s, they were very thorough about running you through all kinds of batteries of tests. And the Hopkins people got done running me through the tests, and they said, okay, perfectly healthy woman took this test. And I said, okay. They said, by the way, you should be a member of Mensa. You got like 140 IQ. And I said, oh, okay.
Really?
That kind of act. Who knows? I don't know if I do or not, but they said I did. and
run with that. Take that and run with it.
Well, okay, I did run with the Mensa people for a while, and I've been voted party animal twice at their conference, their their national convention or something like that. In fact, that came up at work once. I had a new manager, and she called me in the office the second day I was working for her, and says, "So, you were the voted party animal of the convention twice at a Mensa conference." I said, is that a problem? He said, no, I'm a member of Mensa. That's cool. But the bottom line with all this stuff with statistics, the biggest critics I get are not from people not of the UFO community. The biggest critics I get are from the UFO community. Linda Stanton Friedman had a great line: if you can't trash the data, trash the people. Okay. And so what happened was, they figured out I was trans. So they were, how can we believe this person's numbers? She doesn't know what gender it is. Okay. So 2019, I was booked into a UFO convention about every 2 weeks for the whole year. Okay. And I decided I was going to take that in hand. Plus, they were criticizing Linda, and you're a married couple. What the heck is that? Or is she her sister-in-law? What nobody could wrap their head around.
Oh, gosh.
So I've inserted 5 slides into my presentation. There was the title slide, and then there was a picture of me. And I said, this is who I used to be. And I showed him a picture of my battle garb in Vietnam. I showed him my Navy uniform, a big bushy beard. And then I showed him my 1996 glamour shot, that type of thing. And then I showed him a picture of Linda and me jumping over the broom at our commitment ceremony. And I said, we are a married couple. Okay. And this is who I used to be, and this is who we are. And we've done real serious science research in the UFO community, and it's been dreadfully needed for a long time. And if you cannot deal with me, you will never deal with ET. I was waiting to get stoned off the stage, and ultimately 600 people got up and gave me a standing ovation. So, okay. So.
To be continued.
You've been listening to All Things Unexplained. If you liked this podcast, please do give us a 5-star rating and leave us a review. If you would like to hear more All Things Unexplained, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Our show depends on the support of listeners like you. To help keep us going, please be sure to visit patreon.com/allthingsunexplained. Our Patreon patrons get early access to podcasts, as well as exclusive audio and video clips. Or you can find us on Venmo under the business accounts. Just look for @Bigfoot UFO. Additionally, you can support us at buymeacoffee.com/unexplained. If you can't get enough of us, go ahead and check us out at allthings-unexplained.com. A special thanks to our producer, director, sound mixer, editor, and the man who wears far too many hats. No, seriously, he wears a lot of hats, Dr. Tim Mounts. Without you, we couldn't keep the lights on. Thanks for listening to All Things Unexplained.